Let me also add my voice in welcoming our distinguished leaders, Your Excellency Mary Robinson, for coming to be with us, and also the former president of Botswana, Your Excellency Moai. I've just come from Botswana, actually. I arrived this morning. Your Excellency, Mr. Alemayo Tegemu, Minister of Water and Irrigation of the Democratic Republic of Ethiopia, Your Excellency Dr. Carlos Rope, UN Under Secretary General and UNECA Executive Secretary, Your Excellency Vice President of the African Development Bank, Honorable Ministers present, Excellencies, heads of institutions and agencies and representatives of different institutions, members of the diplomatic corps, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. I appreciate my predecessor's remarks, which are very critical as we discuss the issue of climate change. It is a pleasure and honor for me to address this important conference. I wish to first of all convey the sincere regrets of Her Excellency Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, Chairperson of the African Union Commission, for her inability to be present owing to the issue of environment and climate change. We are also grateful to the political leadership provided by our governments of the member states. I know the issue of climate change is now known right to the grassroots. That means that the message has sunk. The theme of this year's climate change for development in Africa is significant, and particularly it is urgent in view of the concerns about the slow progress by the historical emitters in fulfilling commitments to benefit Africa in its bid to tackle the challenge of climate change. It is evident that our continent's deep need to build effective coping mechanisms and robust adaptive capacities is not being given the attention it deserves by those who have emitted the greenhouse gases the most. In addition, part of the process of making the climate negotiations work for Africa is to ensure that the Rio +20 outcomes are followed through with the necessary support and capacity building in pursuit of our sustainable development. A few weeks ago, the fifth IPCC report summary to policymakers was released in Stockholm against the backdrop of growing concerns that anthropogenic interference of the atmospheric system driven by our unsustainable production and consumption patterns is worsening the situation. This means we need urgent action to reverse this trend. The evidence from scientific analysis is compelling, lending way to the view that massive resources need to be allocated to enhance the resilience of African countries, considering that Africa region will be the hardest hit. It is already being hit, but it is continuing to be hit. The scenarios presented tend to show that by the end of this century, the temperature rise could be as high as 4 degrees centigrade. In the medium term, the world is bracing itself to witness a temperature rise of about 2 degrees by mid-century, though it is clearly stated that it is still within our means to exert efforts to keep the rise to 1. Expanding economies with renewable technologies at concessionary rates so that they can set themselves on a low carbon growth trajectory and cope with the adverse impacts of climate change. Also, I must commend Africa for making climate change a priority and also putting their reasonable resources, which is limited in a number, to the issues of adaptation. In fact, the challenges for Africa in COP19 in Warsaw, Poland, will be to continue to advance the causes where leading economies should make available a sufficient quantum of resources on the principle of historic and differentiated responsibilities, considering the historical role they played in really causing the global warming and climate change. While financial flows based on the pledges made by the historical emitters will be crucial in facilitating Africa's adaptation, the financing of technological change in an environmentally sustainable manner remains of a strategic priority to AU member states. The establishment of the Technology Center, being one of the key outcomes at COP16 in Cancun, will be hosted by UNEP. Our countries can seek considerable support from this center to catalyze the flow of sustainable technologies. It is important that Africa accesses relevant technologies in order to move ahead in its development agenda. Africa will also need to push for the establishment of a loss and damage institution, this time in Africa, especially because climate change has already inflicted considerable damage and massive losses on our economies, on our communities, and on our nations. But also we need to unpack this loss and damage so that we are able to know how we need to get this implemented. We need to do more work on this one. I know our negotiators are keenly following up all this, and we have just come from the ministerial meeting of environment in Gaborone. Following the outcome of Rio Plus 20 in mid-2012, the tempo of follow-up actions in Africa has helped focus minds of AU member states to deliver explicitly on the flagship programs. The African Union Commission has worked very closely with the UN agencies in Africa, and this collective endeavor characterizes the spirit of solidarity and unity among leaders and the people of the continent. This is the very essence of Pan-Africanism, and its close connection with the idea of African Renaissance is evident, indeed, stemming as it were from the prospect to materialize the implementation of the flagship programs, given their potential to facilitate Africa's economic renewal. These two overarching organizing principles, that is, Pan-Africanism and the African Renaissance, you will remember, were embodied in the theme of this year's celebration of the founding of the Organization of the African Unity 50 years ago, and the birth of the African Union in 2003. This conference is therefore important as we also strategize for Africa's Agenda 2063, and I call upon all of you to contribute to that because the processes are already ongoing. But the confluence of these virtuous dimensions in Africa's historical evolution can also be related in more recent times to the role being played by the Committee of African Heads of State and Government on Climate Change, which in a single, united voice articulates Africa's interests in international climate change negotiations, and the streamlining of the coordination mechanism of the Committee of Climate Change with the Presidents of AMCEN is a reflection of that unifying synergy so crucial in advancing Africa's noble cause, regionally and internationally. As you are aware, the UN General Assembly also renamed UNEP's Governing Council as the United Nations Environment Assembly, UNEA, following the resolution of 13th March 2013. This was a follow-up to the decision of the 14th session of AMCEN in Arusha in 2012, calling for the strengthening and upgrading of UNEP, but also later by the AU heads of state, calling for UNEP to be a strong organization on the continent. It is our sincere hope that this move would contribute to the substantial strengthening of the UN system as a whole in ways that would facilitate and support the African Union Commission in the implementation of various relevant programs. The African Union is encouraged by the cooperation and support from our partners and stakeholders, as well as the increasing commitment by our leadership on the continent. As I conclude, I would like, therefore, to assure Your Excellencies of the commitment of the AU Commission to support Africa's efforts at all levels and continuing its unlimited support to the African group of negotiators with a view to realize a successful deal for Africa at the next UNFCCC negotiation, that is COP19 round, that will take place next month in Warsaw, Poland. I would like to thank you all for your kind attention, and I wish you fruitful deliberations.